Yeah, welcome back, Andrew. It's great to
Thank
see
you.
you again. And thank you for reaching out. For those who have seen Andrew's previous episode or have been following our podcast, we're going to be doing something a little special with these next few episodes that Andrew's going to be a part of. Andrew had this great idea to talk a little bit about the state of career development as a whole, and to address kind of our career development practitioners out there who are looking to advance in the field, talk about the opportunities that are available to those of you who are thinking about exploring career development, and then bring some people together from this field to share thoughts as a group. So we're actually going to be doing a three-part sort of mini series as part of the podcast that really focuses on career development as a field. And in this first part of the mini series, Andrew and I are just going to be talking a bit about an overview of the field in general. And before we started recording, Andrew, you were talking a bit about, why this is top of mind for you. Do you want to just touch on that briefly before we get into some of the questions I have for you?
Yeah, so this is as I mentioned to you, this is something that like has been on my mind for a long time. I have been in the field now for, dare I say, over 20 years, if not over 25 years now. I'm getting up there. And so one of the many things that I've noticed is I've been working with career development professionals because a big part of what I do is support other career development professionals
Hmm.
is is providing advice and coaching and mentoring around their own career growth and their own career development. And the reality is for a lot of CDPs is they're terrible at it. And I use the adage that doctors are their own worst patients, and sometimes CDPs are their own worst clients. And I've been guilty of this myself. I will freely admit this. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm also now in a position where I'm actually recruiting staff as well.
Yeah.
And just some of the commonplace errors that people are making, but also seeing some of the good things that people are doing as well. Having the opportunity to share this on a much larger scale through this particular podcast. I know we've already had conversations in the past as well, and you've been really good about talking to individuals about their own career progressions. And so the more we can kind of get that word out there, about, what does the industry look like? What does the advancement in the industry look like? And what are some of those tips that people need to be aware of? Because, and we'll talk about this in the next podcast, like there is an added layer of pressure and of stress as a career development professional applying to career development professional roles because you're expected to be the expert, and when you make a mistake, there's that judgment that comes around it. So it's really important that we kind of look a little bit at that, help strip some of that away, and identify how people can improve themselves from that perspective.
I think that's a great point, and I'm sure that resonates with a lot of people. It's probably a bit like being a writer and applying for a job in journalism or something like that,
Yeah.
where, your submission is already part of what might feel like an evaluation. So I'm sure that's top of mind for people. And through the conversations I've had, I've done almost 70 of these career development professional conversations at this point. It does seem to be something that comes up over and over again is um, either reminding career development professionals that there are resources and tools for them to advance in the field and to learn about the opportunities. Um, or there are questions about where those kinds of, resources come from and how they themselves can use some of the services they provide. So it is this interesting sort of position to be in, and I'm glad we're getting a chance to talk about it. And that's a big thanks, and big thanks to you, Andrew, for bringing this up. So to kind of get into some of the questions, um, to address this first part of the series we're running here, which is just the current kind of landscape and state of career development. Um, let's start with individuals who might be looking at career development as a potential career path. Um, what does the current landscape look like from your perspective? What are the entry points for someone who might be thinking, hey, I would like to be a career development professional?
Yeah. So right now, like in terms of the landscape, like I'm really excited about what the landscape looks like in Canada. And a big part of that is due to the work of like a number of organizations. So within Ontario, we've got the Career Development Practitioner Certification Board of Ontario. There's similar organizations like in different provinces, but you also have national organizations like the Canadian Career Development Foundation and CERIC and other organizations like that that have done a lot of work about raising the profile of career development professionals in Canada and the impact that CDPs have. And part of what we're seeing from that advocacy and that work across the country is an increased recognition and increased professionalization of the field. So it actually is providing a much more structured overview of what the field actually looks like because there's lots of different entry points into the field, which is one of the great things about this field. There are a lot of different entry points, but because there are so many different entry points, it can get very, very confusing for individuals wanting to jump into it. I know when I first came to Canada, and this is 20 years ago, when I was looking at becoming a career development professional in Canada at the time, because I'd already been doing the job in England, I had spoken to a number of nonprofit organizations. And some of them were doing federally funded programs, some were doing provincial funded programs. I was speaking to the colleges and universities. There was some private practitioners I spoke to. And then there's also government agencies, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of different entryways to get into the field, depending on what your background and what your experience is. For a lot of what we're seeing now, particularly in Ontario, and I will utilize Ontario a lot because I'm in Ontario. Like my career has been Ontario, so it will be a little bit Ontario specific. So if there's slight differences in other provinces, I apologize for not recognizing those. But um, within Ontario, there's typically two main entry points into the field. One is through professional training and certification. And so there you have colleges like George Brown, Conestoga, other colleges that offer either part-time or full-time courses around being a career development practitioner. A lot of those programs also have placement or internship or co-op models, depending on the institutions, in order for individuals to get that initial experience in the field. And then from there, they can kind of go in from that side of things. And so that's the one entry point. The other entry point is through other other designations or other degree points. So, for example, I know a number of individuals that have gone to school for social service worker or in sociology that have made their pathway then into the career development field. Other individuals that have gone the counseling route, so has specifically focused on counseling, and then within counseling, focusing on career counseling. And so they've got a university degree, a master's, and have moved into the field from that side of things. And so those would be the two like main common ways of getting into the field. But then you also have individuals like myself who kind of fall into the field. Not so much by accident, but just by happenstance, where they're in the right place at the right time, or they've connected with an individual who works in the field, and there's been something in that conversation that's like, you know what, I've never thought about this before, and this is really interesting. One of the things I love to say about this field is no one wakes up one morning when they're 10 years old and it's their 10th birthday and be like, you know what? I want to be a career development practitioner when I grow up. Like, that's my goal. Like, no one does that. And it's understandable because most people don't know what we do. And so oftentimes it's by having those structured conversations or even accidental conversations with individuals to be like, oh, what is it you actually do? And then they find out more about what we do and they're like, yeah, actually, that sounds interesting. I need to find out more about this. And then they look at, what are some of the different pathways that could apply to them from that perspective.
That's a already, extremely valuable set of insights, Andrew. And I think I've been hearing that sort of advocacy being done as well, where there's just more awareness about what this role entails. And it is extremely meaningful work, to your point. Like this is the kind of work that helps so many people figure out, where it is they belong. And I think
Yeah.
that's sort of something that is top of mind for a lot of people right now. Um, the other thing that I find interesting is I think the traditional sense of what this role is actually just one of the positions, a career development practitioner might hold, where it's,
Oh, totally.
you're doing resume and interview prep, and that's certainly a big part of it. But um, are things like campus recruiting, job development, are those entry level roles where you might be going to campus and meeting with students, or you might be meeting with companies and learning about the job opportunities they have? Are those within the career development sphere, or are those something else?
They, so I will say yes and no, because a lot of them are within that career development field. Um, the yes and the no part really comes to the point of, is it like an entry level role or not?
Uh,
And for that, like, it really depends on the individual and what some of their backgrounds may be. So for example, I know individuals that have come into the employer development or the job development field, that have a strong background in sales.
uh,
And so for them, um, job development was an easy entry level position for them within the career development field because they have that strong sales background. I know others that have gone into job development and they've kind of gone in because first they went into like the employment counseling or the career practitioner route, and so we're doing the resumes and the cover letters and the generalized job search stuff, and then an opportunity opened up that originally they weren't qualified for, but now they've got that little bit more experience. They were able to move into those roles. So a lot of it really does depend on, the organization, and this is one of the things that I love about this field is because you have like nonprofit organizations and community organizations that work directly with individuals, but then you also have your post-secondary institutions like your colleges, your universities. Then you have you have some private practice people, so individuals that are doing this on their own, but then you also have individuals that work within an organization and focus on career and professional development and learning and training. And then you have government organizations as well. And so you actually have individuals that work at both the provincial and federal level around career development within different organizations. And then you can throw on top of that policy work and advocacy and all of those different elements. And depending on the organization and depending on the individual, some may be classified as an entry level role, or could be easily identified as entry level role. Others are a little bit more structured. Um,
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And now you can, hopefully already see for those of you that are watching this and are curious about the field, there is a wide set of possibilities that you could explore. And it makes me think of one thing that might help clarify again some of these distinct roles. Where do recruiting firms fall into the spectrum here, Andrew? Is that again separate to kind of traditional career development work? I'm thinking more of, the Randsteds and Kelly Services, places like this where individuals might come for like maybe it's closer to the work that a job developer would do where you've kind of made a connection, you're meeting someone and you're recommending them for a position. Or do I have any of that mixed up there?
no, you can't. It's one of those crossover elements where it incorporates a lot of the areas of career development, but it's focused for a specific goal, which for for argument's sake, Randstad is, the successful placement of individuals for a client.
Right.
We see it when we look at like people that are involved in human resources and talent acquisition. They utilize a lot of the same skills that are utilized within career development in terms of when they're recruiting and selecting candidates. Obviously they need to have a keen awareness of what are the trends for that particular industry, what the organization that they're working with, have a keen understanding of what the employer is looking for. But they also oftentimes will do a lot of providing advice and guidance to candidates around individuals that might be interested in working for that organization, what they should be looking out for, those kinds of things. Obviously, the perspective of your Randstad or your human resources department is, their focus is on their business, their client,
Right.
whereas career development individuals, they're more focused on the client, the individual in front of them, as opposed to a business.
That's a very helpful distinction. And a big part of why I'm really glad we're breaking this into three episodes. There's so much to cover.
Oh yeah.
So with some of those, kind of entry points covered, the next part that I did want to ask is kind of on behalf of people who are in the field and are thinking about growth opportunities. So maybe the first thing I would like to kind of get your insight on is there a set of roles that you see demand for? More senior level roles that people should be aware of, uh, so that they can start exploring growth opportunities within the field because, we've already heard how many potential entry points there are. I have a feeling that there's, also awareness or a light that needs to be shone on the growth
Yeah.
opportunities that kind of come after that. So what comes to mind for you in terms of that?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind is, and I'm going to kind of break it into a couple of different areas because again, this tends to be very sector specific because when you're looking at nonprofit and community organizations or organizations that are handling Employment Ontario funding, et cetera, um, those particular organizations, there is growth potential, but it's over the longer term because individuals within those roles typically stay there for a very long time,
See that.
within like, supervisory or managerial roles. And so there is some progression from that side of things, but the timing is really important. The individuals and what that organization is looking for is really important. And so what we'll often see within I'll label it all the nonprofit sector, is you'll see a lot of lateral growth. And so you'll see individuals moving from one organization to another organization and moving up the ladder, the progression ladder that way.
Okay.
And so you'll see, typically it'll be like things like supervisors and managers are really where the progression lies from that perspective.
Mhm.
Um, but then when we look at the post-secondary sector, there the growth potential is a lot more mobile. Because the reality is within the post-secondary sector is yes, there's a lot of that lateral movement with people moving from organization to organization, but as new initiatives and projects are formed within the school or within the university, there's just generally more opportunities for individuals to get involved at that higher level or to develop their skills to move forward at that higher level. Again, depending on the institution that you're at, sometimes it may take a longer, it may take shorter. Again, I can't speak for everybody, but oftentimes what you'll see, for example, is that people will go into what we call those entry level roles um, at a institution. So it could very well such be like a job coach or career counselor, that type of entry level where you're just doing the initial conversations with students, working on things like, their networking, their resumes, events, that kind of stuff. And then there's opportunities from there to kind of go into more what could be classed as senior level roles. So it could be a supervisory role, it could be going into an advisor level role where you're working with specialized students or specialized faculty. So you need a little bit more direct knowledge from that side of things, and then kind of moving up from there. So it's a little bit slightly different. But then even amongst all of those things, there's lots of other nibble opportunities that people can kind of go into as well because I mentioned earlier about the programs that exist. And so there's
Yes.
opportunities there for people to kind of go into teaching, or there's private practice. And so for those I know a lot of individuals in the field that will do career coaching and employment support on the private side as a side hustle. So it's not something that they're able to do on a full-time basis, but it helps to bring in that extra income and it helps them to flex their entrepreneurial skill. I know other individuals that will do some policy work or kind of do some advising from that side of things. So there's lots of different opportunities from that side. And I think a big part of it is just really kind of identifying as an individual where you want to go. I think that's
Mhm.
really a big part because yes, there are all these different opportunities, but if you don't really know um, where you see yourself in 5 or see yourself in 10 years, you're not really going to be able to focus on where you want to be. And this is kind of one of the mistakes I made early on in my career. I was just doing the work and I was enjoying doing the work, but I didn't really see myself anywhere. And it wasn't until I'd been in the field like 6 years, I had just gotten married, I was moving to Canada, and now all of a sudden I have a wife, we're thinking about family, and it's like, okay, now I actually need to get serious about my career and figure out where do I want to be? What do I want to do? And so that really made me think about, okay, well, now is when I really need to start planning and looking at what I want to do in the future.
It's such a good point, and it is difficult to do, as I'm sure many people in this field know from the conversations they're having with clients who also need to think through, what their career journey, is going to be focused on.
Yeah.
But I think this kind of thing, if you're watching this, you're already taking a step in the right direction by just giving yourself a better sense of what the possibilities are, and maybe something you hear resonates with you and you start to go that direction, which kind of makes sense in terms of what you're saying. The advancement opportunities are, I could see very easily someone in a frontline role, being part of a project and going, it was really cool bringing that new tool in,
Hmm.
or being part of that funding opportunity. And if you do take a leadership role, even just, among the team,
Hmm.
there's always a champion,
Yeah.
um, that kind of emerges. And I feel like it's those people that end up kind of being first in line for some of those
Yep.
opportunities, or those are the people who kind of they'll get the invitation to, or the notice that, hey, something's coming along. Um, and even more so if you're someone who kind of knows, hey, you want to explore these senior level roles once you're aware of them.
Yeah. I think it's
Uh,
also important to
yeah.
recognize as well because one of the things in the industry that's not really talked about a lot is there is actually risk in this industry. If you're working for a nonprofit or a government or government funded organization, that funding is may not be guaranteed year after year. I work at a university, and as we've seen this year within Ontario, a lot of colleges and universities are having major budget issues. And so, career counseling and career services falls within student services, which in hard times is the first thing to be cut. And, you know, when political parties change, that changes funding models and things like that. Same even with just being private practice. Like just because you're out there on your own doesn't necessarily mean that's a guaranteed income. So there is that inherent risk within the field, but it's balanced by the fact that as career development professionals, we should know how to look after our own career, which one of the reasons why we're having this conversation. But
Yes.
but secondly, it's important to actually understand that that is a risk. And so, and I've been using this term a lot lately this year, but the ability to be able to future-proof our career by taking advantage of those opportunities, by being the one that steps up and says, "Hey, you know what? I'll volunteer to lead that committee," or
Yeah.
"Yeah, I'm happy to join on this project to learn something new." Because when that risk does manifest itself and funding is not guaranteed that year or funding is reduced that year, we have the skills and abilities to apply elsewhere or to do something different within the same organization because we've created that value piece.
It's such a good point, and it's such a small thing that can start that domino effect. I've worked with many career development professionals, um, who are open-minded and, willing to learn about new tools and services that they can use to better serve their clients. And many of them are the ones who end up, getting invited to speak at conferences on behalf of the organization about the success of a given project, or funding opportunity. And you can kind of see, or at least I can, in real time, their careers maturing.
Yeah.
And it's, just from them being willing to try something new. And I know that's not always easy. Um, there's a lot of new things going on, but for the people who kind of make space for that,
Hmm.
it can lead to some really interesting places. And it kind of leads me into the next thing I'm wondering, which I think you're already getting at here, Andrew. It's kind of about these, next 5 to 10 years for folks. For the field in general, how do you think it's going to evolve? What sorts of things can we consider as we plan out, where we might want to be as career development professionals in the next 5 to 10 years? Does anything come to mind so far?
Um, well, I mean, there is the the automatic thing that comes to mind, and if anyone's Googling right now, top trends in career development, it's AI, it's the digital space. Like those are the big things that's coming up. And I love the conversations that are taking place around this, because I feel like we've had those conversations time and time again, having now been in the field for so long. I remember back in England 25 years ago when internet job boards were becoming more prominent, and people were like, "We're going to be out of a job. We're going to close all these centers because people will be able to job search online." Yeah, that never happened. I was in a conference last week, and there was a keynote speaker from the University of Tampa, a gentleman called Tim Harding, and he was part joking, part reminiscing about AI, and he remembers way back in the day when you would have a career library. And so you would have hundreds of books all about resumes and resume examples and how people would look at those books and copy the examples out word for word.
Uh,
And it's like, that's AI now. Because you could Google, create me a resume, and it'll give you an example, and people still will copy it. And so you still need that human piece that's connected um, to the technology to help provide some of that advice and guidance to help, with proofreading, but also to really kind of help and say, is this actually going to be beneficial to you? And to help ask some of the hard questions. One of the things that career development professionals can be really, really good at and are in a great position to kind of be involved in is to really look at career as a holistic tool, and really look at how is this going and ask the question, how is this going to impact not just your day-to-day job, but how does this impact your career? How does this impact your life? How is this going to impact your family? How is this going to impact where you're going to be in 5 or 10 years time from now? And really kind of help focus individuals on looking at some of those questions. So they're not just relying on this disembodied voice on the internet that says, you should go and be a funeral director. And I say that because whenever I take career cruising, which is a great assessment tool, it always picks number one choice or number two choice, funeral director.
uh,
And I'm like, that's great, but I don't want to deal with dead bodies.
right.
So you need that human being to kind of talk to you and give you the understanding as to why you got selected there. And it's the reason you get that job is selected is because it looks at the skills, it looks at the competencies connected to that role. And so it's like, well, that's the best match. But if we look at those skills, if we look at those competencies, we can look at other elements as well. And so having that human being there to really talk about those areas is really important. But also it's like it's all about also taking that impact. Like one of the big trends that we're seeing in the industry right now is really the impact that career development professionals have on helping changing workforce demographics and really helping to um, either break down, overcome, burrow under, or navigate around some of the different barriers and even systemic barriers that people are facing when it comes to entering into different careers and things of that nature. And so career development professionals really have that space and capability right now to work in that space and to really look at how can we reduce some of these barriers to individuals, particularly for like marginalized individuals and things like that. So that's another area that we're really seeing connection to. And there's also like, kind of connected to that, there's also connections to mental wellness as well, that career development can really focus in on. But then two final areas that I want to talk about in terms of like really trends is number one is we are now seeing this shift from experience-based hiring to skills-based hiring. And particularly, I see this a lot within the post-secondary space because I'm looking at a lot of new grads, which obviously don't have a lot of experience. And so a lot of what I see from employers is, you'll see lists of job postings and like maybe 10% of the job posting will be about a significant experience or a specific tool. The rest of the job posting is you need to have this skill. So you need to be able to deal with team building, you need to be able to deal with communication, you need to be able to deal with problem solving and creativity. And being a career development practitioner gives me that space to actually talk to individuals and help them to understand what their skills are, to help them to kind of go through their journey, to talk, ask questions, tell stories, and then figure out what are those strengths and skills that they have. Because I guarantee you, every time I talk to somebody, and I know there's a lot of people will hear this as well, you'll meet with a client for the first time and they'll be like, well, I don't have any skills. I don't know what I can do. Like I talked to when I was in the nonprofit space, I would talk to people that had worked at a manufacturing plant for 40 years, and they're like, I was a machine stamper. Like I worked on an assembly line. Like I don't have any other skills. And then
Yeah.
you talk to them and you listen to their stories and you hear about the volunteer work they're doing. You hear about the stuff that they're doing with their kids and you hear about, the different things that they've been involved in and you're identifying strengths left, right, and center. Um, you don't get that from a computer. That has to be a person that you're talking to. But then the other piece connected to that as well, though, is we're now living in this global economy. And while there's a lot of attention right now in the news about immigration and, international students and all of that mix, the reality is we're never going to escape that fact that we are part of a global economy. We, as Canadians, we need immigration to continue. So that's never going to go away. It's impractical to say we're going to get rid of all immigration. Um, but also when we look at the skills and the knowledge that we have and the way that companies are interconnected, like we need to have that global understanding and that global awareness, and help clients and help students, in my case, understand that piece, but also help those individuals that are coming to Canada in terms of, how they can be connected to employers, how they can identify the best individuals to work with and help identify the skills that they have to apply for those roles. Again, I still hear it every now and again. I haven't heard it as much being in the post-secondary space, but I used to hear a lot about, well, you don't have Canadian experience. And I'm like, that is a line that is just ridiculous because,
Yeah.
you know, um, if the only reason you can say to an individual is because they don't have Canadian experience, yeah, I'll call it as it is. That's kind of racist
Yeah.
because I know individuals that have done that job for 20 years and you're saying they can't do it in Canada because they don't have Canadian experience. No, the only reason you don't want to hire them is because they're from another country.
It's
And so, as CDPs, we can help individuals navigate that landscape and identify what are actually the best companies to work for so you don't have to deal with that kind of attitude.
And I think that goes back to the human element you're talking about,
Yeah.
kind of as the thread through all these different roles that CDPs will end up playing. Whether it's advocating on behalf of the client or student, to companies, helping them identify,
Yeah.
yeah, companies that are forward thinking and recognize that, hey, not all your clients are from Canada. So someone with international experience might very well connect with a client,
Yeah.
in a unique way that's very useful for the company, and help clients recognize, students and clients, as a synonym there, recognize these skills they have. It's funny you say that. I was in a workshop yesterday, and two students uh, gave us the chance to look over their resume with the group that we were running the workshop around. One was interested in being a paralegal, and one was interested in being a nurse. And in the skills section, neither of them had listed, um, you know, the skills that correspond to that
Mm.
job. They had put they're in a paralegal program and a
Yeah.
nursing program, but under the skills section in their resume, it wasn't there. And we kind of ran it through, our mock ATS system and showed them, this kind of means that you're not going to be selected for an interview
Yeah.
because you haven't listed that skill. But do you have that skill? And they're both like, yes, of course, we have it. But it's, without that conversation, without giving them a sense of, how some of these automated systems work,
Mhm.
it can lead to this extremely frustrating and confusing sort of limbo where you're looking at your resume and thinking, but everything's on here, and you just don't recognize that, well, the way the system works is you need to put it like this. And that's a small piece of it. But I think
Yeah.
when you're talking to someone and they can point you in the right direction and give you that guidance, um, I think that's extremely valuable. And I think it's only going to get more valuable
Mhm.
as these systems and, as AI kind of evens the playing field in some of these other areas, the human connections we have and the, oh, Andrew recommended I reach out to you type of conversations are going to be even more valuable. So I know I'm taking you over time here, Andrew. So again, I'm glad we have two more episodes to kind of talk through these things because I have a ton more questions. And in the next segment, we're going to focus on the strategies you can
Yes.
use to apply for roles specifically. So these are, this is going to be the episode around, are you using the advice that you're giving people? Are you being a good patient as
Yeah.
even though you're a doctor? But is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of the field as a whole for this
Yeah,
segment?
I think in this, and I will end on this because this leads directly into the next one, is one of the things that I talk to a lot of people about when they're looking at getting into this field, because there are so many different entry points and things like that, is really think about where is it that you want to make the most impact. Like every one of us is different in terms of where we want to make the most impact. And so that's something you should be constantly asking yourself as you kind of go through your journey. Where I am right now as an individual is completely different from when I first started in this field or when I was in nonprofit. Like, and I learned a lot about myself. And so really continuing to ask yourself, even if you've been in the field 20 years, like, where am I, where do I want to make the most impact? And if I am in the field, am I making that impact here or not? I think that's like a question that you should be kind of asking yourself on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you're ending on that note because that could mean a couple different things to different people. It could mean, where can you make the most direct impact on clients? If you're
Yep.
someone who wants to be sitting across the desk from someone who needs career guidance and that's where you want to be, uh, that's a specific kind of role.
Mhm.
Um, another thing we had talked about kind of prior to this episode today is do you want to focus your work in nonprofit,
Yeah.
post-secondary, or private sector? So, a really good question to kind of, I think, give people as we close out this episode. And in the next segment, we're going to talk about, yeah, the different strategies you can use to apply for roles in these areas. So, I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation, Andrew. Thanks again so much for suggesting this. I think people are going to find it valuable. And I'm looking forward, yeah, to
I'm
jumping
looking
into the
forward to
next.
it as well.
Awesome. Well, I will talk to you soon then. And for everyone listening, hopefully some of these notes are already helping you pick that next direction. So thanks again, Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you, Imran.